When I met Noah, I was young enough to still believe that boys like him could love girls like me. I know better now, but I love him still. I was born what my mama called ugly and my grandma called angel-kissed. A birthmark spread purple across my left cheekbone and around my eye, like some unknown continent marked out on a map. Apart from this stain that left me mirror-shy and friendless in middle school, there was nothing else much to me. I grew up in a town named Grace, as unremarkable as I was, fatherless but otherwise content. Grace was the kind of place nobody left, not because they wanted to stay, but because they couldn't dream up anywhere better. Grass came up brown, sun stealing any color from the landscape. Our cows were the color of dirt and docile and slow like most of the people that lived in the clapboard houses handed down from their fathers' father. Our flowers were pale. Any that grew bright quickly died in the heat. Bright things didn't survive long out here in the sun-scrubbed fields and stunted mountains. But Noah was different. I met Noah on prom night, but I'd grown up alongside him for the past 10 years. He'd just never noticed me. A life lived in the background of other people's stories. Half of the girls in school had his name carved into their desks, or even their wrists like Manny Jacobs had in freshman year. Blood mixed with love. People were drawn to him, girls and boys alike, wanting to be closer to the way he burned, closer to the noise and chaos and light he dragged around with him. Nothing about Noah was dull like the dead-end roads and long-lashed cattle. He drove too fast, drank too much, surrounded by boys that liked to run like wolves, girls who climbed out of their bedroom windows to join them out in the trees. But he was kind, too, had a smile like rain parting the clouds, laughed easily with his back teeth showing. I'd spent high school dancing alone in my room with the radio turned down so low only I could hear it, feet familiar on the floorboards, never once asked to a homecoming or a party. But for prom, my mama was adamant I went. She had been prom queen back in the day. My dad had borrowed his daddy's car, brought her white roses and all. She was under no delusions I'd be the same, but she was forcing me to go nevertheless. She even gave me her old dress to wear. Grandma had altered it for me, hands patient on her sewing machine, making a space in the world for me to belong, if only for the night. I'd held my hand in front of the left side of my face when I looked in the mirror, teeth pulling at the dead skin on my bottom lip. I looked almost pretty, hair falling delicately around my neck. Grandma slapped down my hand, shaking her head. "You look beautiful, Callie, my angel girl." She kissed me between the eyes, her smile lines curving around her temples, each one a reminder of a life well lived. Tally marks of happiness. Then Mama called me into her bedroom. My mother's bedroom was a place I was rarely allowed. It seemed like a place I could never fit into, like walking through a church or a museum, a quiet place left behind by time. A chipped cat figurine sat beside a stack of lilac-wrapped romance novels. Spines cracked from too many reads. The bottles of perfume on the vanity were all near emptiness. Pretty things didn't remain long in our house. A single photo was on the bedside table. It was of Mama and me when I was about 5, bad side of my face turned from the camera, just the way she liked it. She slept alone in her wedding bed, and I wondered if sometimes in the early mornings when the sky was soft, she would wake up reaching for the other side before she remembered my daddy had been gone years, her hands still forgetting in the dark. Mama had patted the bed next to her. I wondered if she saw any of herself in me as I sat in the prom dress she'd worn the night I was put inside of her by my daddy. I wondered if she wanted to. She'd gripped my jaw in her hand, turning it to the right where my skin was clean and smooth. The half of me she loved. She'd run a thumb down my cheek, shaking her head and sighing before jerking my face to the left, brow creasing as she looked at the purple stain, like a drink spilled. Another careless mistake just like I'd been when my parents were 18. Wordless, she had crossed to her dresser and handed me a bottle of foundation. I sat in front of the mirror, refusing to meet my own gaze. Her hands rested either side of my shoulders, nails digging in. My skin was the same on either side, her endless disappointment now hidden deep beneath the makeup. "You're still plain as anything, honey, but at least it ain't plain ugly now." She smiled and squeezed my shoulder. Her mouth softened for a moment. "Brings out the blue in your eyes, just like mine." The night was almost over. I had spent my night with my back pressed against the bricks of the gym, the only still body in the room as everyone danced, shoulders bared to the strings of light stretching from wall to wall, stars brought inside. I read once that when you dance with someone else, your heartbeats match up, making body music, beating to time. My heart stuttered alone in my chest. I pushed my spine from the wall and I couldn't take it anymore, ready to drive myself home. Noah caught me with his shoulder as I made my way out. He pressed his hand on my shoulder blade, an apology of skin, his palm warm. He tilted his head to one side as he looked at me.
"Don't I know you?"
He asked, and I laughed at that. Of course, I felt like I had known him my whole life, and he didn't even recognize me.
"It's Callie, right?"
He grinned, lopsided and beautiful, front tooth chipped. I nodded, wide-eyed in his gaze.
"I remember you now. You were the one that picked me flowers when my mama died."
I struggled to breathe, lungs forgetting themselves for a moment. Memory seeped in, and suddenly we were 7 years old again. Noah with Band-Aids on his knees, crying in the long grass around the back of the art classroom. Sitting back to back in the dirt, my hands small and nail-bitten, handing him daisies. Something pretty for the pain. His eyes narrowed and he reached for my face, too quick for me to stop him. I could feel his pulse in his thumb and my heart slowed, keeping perfect pace with the blood in his body. He dragged a finger down my cheek, purple blooming like wildflowers. You can try to bury them, but they always grow back eventually. I knocked his hand away, tears blurring the mess of my face and covering my unloved side.
"Why are you wearing all that shit on your face, Callie?"
He asked. I looked down, lost, still reeling that he even knew my name. The two of us still in the middle of the dancers as they swayed, hip flasks and bruises passing between lips, girls with flowers in their hair and boys in their one-night-only suits. He pulled my hand from my cheek, replacing it with his own, but on the right side of my face, leaving the mark to the soft haze of the lights.
"You're beautiful, just like this,"
he said. He said the same thing later in the backseat of his car. My mother's dress around my waist, hands in his hair, night air rolling through the open windows. And he said the same thing again when we woke up together in the mornings that came after, sleep-drenched and warm, sheets tangled, his hand resting on my right cheekbone. And that was it for me. I was gone. Love comes slow, they say, but for me, that was it. I loved him from the moment his shoulder met mine in the half-dark, from the moment my stupid heart started running to keep up. That was loving Noah, always running to keep up, breathless and terrified of being left behind. But he never did. Within a year, we had moved into a trailer in the park he'd grown up in. I'd never been happier. He'd bring me 7-Eleven flowers on his way home from work, bright and smelling of gasoline. We would dance barefoot together in our bedroom, radio turned down low and just for us. We'd take night drives until the dead grass and flat houses were far behind, until Grace was far behind, and the trees turned green and the sun came out, turning everything to pink and gold. Noah got restless a lot. Sometimes I would wake up in the blue mornings and feel like my mother, reaching in the dark for someone no longer there. But he always came back to me. We were so happy that first year. I had a job cleaning houses in the gated community up in the hills, half an hour from town, and Noah worked odd jobs when he could be bothered. He would get so bored and he would quit after a few weeks and have to find something new. But that was Noah, and I loved him for it. Everything around him would burn out, but never Noah. He worked pumping gas, night shifts at the bar, endless construction jobs, even a bouncer at the strip club for a week until he got fired for turning up drunk. I didn't care, though. We always managed to get by, and he drove me to work every morning, singing along to Nirvana or whatever else he'd have blasting from his speakers, making me laugh until my head spun and my stomach ached. The first girl was the start of our second spring together, when the swallows started to come home, no longer afraid of the cold. She was called Nicole. She had blonde hair like honey dripping down her collarbones, skin clean as milk. I'd watched him eyeing her up for weeks, eyes straying to follow her when we'd see her around town in her cutoffs, or at the bar in Grace drinking a Jack and Coke, or in Walmart buying shampoo. I watched the way she'd eyed him back, hip bones taut against her waistband, eyebrow raised at our hands held together. She was beautiful, like Noah. I carried my jealousy for days in the pit of my stomach, cradling it, feeding it, imagining the worst. It left me sleepless and sad, my heart hurting to the point where I started smoking just so I'd have something to do with my hands, endlessly nervous. When I walked in on them in our bedroom on a Sunday, in the bed we slept in, I cried for hours afterward, locking myself in the bathroom. Noah talked me down, though. He always could. He held my face in his hands, said he was sorry, said it wouldn't happen again, that she was gone now and wouldn't be coming back. I spat at him, said I would make sure of it. For the first time since my mama told me if I left I couldn't come back, terrified of watching me repeat her mistakes, I wished I could go home. Summer passed us by, days sunlit and slow. Noah held a job for 3 whole months, took me to the movies every week, shoulders pressed together in the dark, eyes lit up by the silver screen. Flowers filled the kitchen to the point where I had to stop him from buying more. I laughed at that, sitting up on his lap on one of the lawn chairs outside, watching the stars crawl out of the black. He even drove us all the way out to the ocean, saving gas for weeks. We stood hand in hand in the waves, and it felt like the tide was pulling us back together. It didn't last. The second girl was called Irene. Blonde and tanned and sun-drenched, white teeth that caught the light when she laughed like Noah's did. I found them together in his truck, and I screamed until I hit the dirt, head in my hands. Noah promised me he'd stop, and this time he meant it. I slept at my grandma's after it was over. She held me while I cried, hands gentle and smoothing the tangles from my hair. She didn't ask me what happened, but said sometimes people never change. It's the way they grow, and it remains, bone deep in their blood. They want to change, but they can't. I knew how that felt. I watched the moon trace patterns like lace through the blinds across the ceiling and ignored when Noah called. He turned up after 3 days with white roses. If my mama could have seen me now. He went home and I followed. That was loving Noah, always terrified of being left behind. By the time the new year came, snow washing the gray mountains in the distance something clean, I'd forgiven him. But I knew it wouldn't last. As the days got lighter, I'd catch him watching the girl that lived in one of the houses I cleaned when she opened the door for me, Cynthia. He'd wave from the truck as he drove off, and my heart would curl up and die in my chest. Those were my hands, ones that held me together, the ones that touched the unloved parts of me, and now he was using them for her. I got home that night and told him that if he didn't stay away from her, it would end up exactly like last time, and he knew what I would do. He promised. He kissed me in the TV glow, thumbs fitting in the base of my throat. He lied, but I still loved him. I walked in on them a week later and was too hollow to cry this time. After, I washed the blood from my hands into the kitchen sink, Noah pressing a single kiss between my shoulder blades, nothing left to say between us. By this time, the missing posters for Nicole had long washed away in the spring rains, and Irene's family still thought she'd moved back to Chicago. I wondered how long it would take the search for Cynthia to begin. Noah held me as I cried on the new sheets we'd gone out and bought from Walmart that evening. Old ones too blood-soaked to do anything but burn them. We watched the bonfire, hand in hand. I tipped my head back, watching the sparks struggle for the sky, and wishing I could leave with them. The girls kept coming. He couldn't help himself. They were beautiful, and I was not. They were bright, just like him. Couldn't stay away from the way he burned, either. The months passed, all that blood mixed with love. I grew numb to it, but could never stop the anger and the jealousy and the sadness. It consumed me. I grew used to washing the blood from the walls of the trailer, to laying my anger to sleep in the pit of my stomach until the next time, until the next girl. I'd count the mornings I'd woke up alone, wondering how I'd become this. I no longer hid the mark on the left side of my face when I looked in the mirror. I was glad the ugly showed, a warning sign to the world. It was spring again. The rains had come in late this year, leaving the dirt cracked and the air heavy. And I had seen the way Noah had been looking at Jenny, the girl who lived next door. She was only 17, the same age I had been when I'd first met him. Before I'd become this terrible thing letting the darkest places in our lives swallow me whole. But Ginny was different. She was sweet and she was kind. She loved animals, doted on her little brothers. Sometimes she would come sit with me in the lawn chairs out front and I'd let her smoke my menthols and we'd talk until the streetlights came on. I didn't want Ginny to get hurt. Didn't want her to end up like those other girls. But I saw the way Noah's eyes would follow her when she walked past our windows. I tried to warn her for my own sake as much as hers. I yelled, told her to stay away from Noah or there would be trouble. But that evening, I walked in on them in our bed. The tears came like the first time. I tried to tell her it wasn't my fault. You promised, Noah. You promised. My voice was dull in the silence of the room. Jenny's dying breath's the only other sound as Noah pulled his hunting knife from her stomach, parting the soft skin like a deer belly. Out of all the girls he'd killed, she'd been the youngest. He held my face in his hands, blood spreading across my right cheek. I looked over his shoulder to the mirror, both sides of my face marked out, one by an angel and one by the devil.
I'm sorry,
he said, taking my hands in his bloody ones. I'd have to wash them clean now, but I knew stains like this never really came out. You carry them with you wherever you go. And try to bury them, but they always grow back. A warning to the world that goes unseen. The real ugliness is the one we make ourselves. Two shoulders meeting in the dark. Two hearts keeping time. The worst part for me wasn't the blood and the lying and the fear. It was knowing where the bodies were buried. It was the way he always chose them over me. The way I was never enough for him. Never beautiful enough or bright enough. Always second choice, always second best. But I love him still.